Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
Today on the AllMomDoes podcast, I am so thrilled to have a guest who is going to be helping us as we continue in this series on spiritual growth. And today we're going to talk a lot about our children and helping our kids with their spiritual growth. And so I am absolutely delighted to welcome to the show today a Dove Award-winning musician, artist, creative, Yancy Richmond. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. So give our listeners some details on you and on your life and where you live, just so that they can kind of get a fuller picture of who you are.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a mom of two boys. They're 11 and 6, and my family lives in the Nashville, Tennessee area. So we've been here a good long while now, and I travel the country making music for kids, leading worship at camps and VBS events and doing family concerts, and love just resourcing the church with tools that they can use in their weekend, Sunday morning programs to lead worship, to teach kids about worship. And so that's a huge passion of mine, and I'm excited to share with you guys today.
Absolutely. How did you decide to, first of all, pursue music? Because that is a big undertaking. I just got back into town from Nashville. And, Yancy, Austin is always liking to think that it's sort of the epicenter of a lot of music. And there is a lot of music here. But wow, right. You go to Nashville and in every mall, on every street corner, in every hotel lobby, there is somebody playing music. So How did you start to get into that industry? Because it's pretty daunting to think about really tackling that. And Nashville has so much great music, but there are a lot of amazing musicians. Yeah. How was that path for you?
Well, I honestly have known since I was single digits in age, just really felt like God had put me on this earth to do music. And kind of, when I was around like 7 or so, had some opportunities to just like sing on a worship team at church and sing my first little special as the offertory in children's church and stuff. And it was just kind of like, once I did some of those things, it was like pedal to the metal. Like it was just a knowing, like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it's interesting being on this side of it, because I'm starting to have those flashbacks and become aware as well that it feels like on this side of it, all the adults in my life were aware of this being on me as well. You just start remembering conversations with leaders and, just little things. And you're like, they knew, which is humbling to think about. But music had always been my goal, and doing Christian music. I did my first concert when I was 15 because I had an amazing youth pastor who felt God ask him, Yancy wants to do, how can you help her take a next step? And so he gave me the Wednesday night service one week, a couple months down the road, and I did my first concert. And that was just really one of those like milestone moments of helping me then to like share the songs that I'd written with other people and start going out and trying to do other things in our city. We lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time, and made my first album when I was 17 and started coming back and forth to Nashville. Just had met a few people at some conferences that I attended. And, it's kind of one of those like, call me when you come to town and,
right.
Start setting up co-writes and just kind of started this whole process. And so music and CCM was kind of always the goal. And I did that exclusively for, probably about 5-6 years. Had an opportunity to start leading more worship for our church in Tulsa, where we were at the time. And it's kind of one of those like one day a week turns into a very full-time job sort of snowball situations for a few years. Somewhere along that same path then is where I had an opportunity to write some kids songs for a summer camp. They needed a theme song, and it was kind of like, who do we know that can write a song? Okay, Yancy, so it was literally checking a box and just doing the thing that they asked me to do. I had grown up around children's ministry and never in a million years had thought about doing something with that in regards to the music. But I kind of say like God led me on this journey where it was a bunch of easy yeses. You know, it was a lot of like minimal commitment, you know, steps. And you kind of get farther down the road and, you know, get to a certain point where it's like God's shining a light crystal clear on this path. And so let me change my focus and do that. So I've been focused on kids with my music since 2008. And this fall, I celebrate 25 years since I released my first album. So it's been quite a big journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really fascinated that you started out on a path when you were still in your teens. And I think it would make complete sense that you would go, oh, I've got these people speaking into my life. This is a heading. I'm getting opportunities. And it looks like it's in this direction. And then the further you get, it begins to course correct a little bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes, Yancy, I think it can be hard for us either with our kids or with ourselves when we feel like we're having some success in a particular direction, and maybe it's a preferred direction, or maybe it's the one that we just thought was what we were supposed to go after. When we start seeing some of that course correction, if you will, it can almost sometimes feel like, oh, are we having vision drift, mission drift? Are we not still going for the thing? Are we distracted? Yeah. We've had some great writings in recent years from people talking about, you know, you want to really be careful what you say yes to. You want to be careful what you say no to. And sometimes a lot of that advice is saying, don't lose your heading. You know, you said you wanted this. How can we remain pliable for ourselves, for the direction of our kids' lives, so that we don't miss an opportunity like this that can take you into something that you might not have even known it was a thing, or maybe it really wasn't even much of a thing until, Yancy, you kind of really created this genre where you really take it in a direction that God wants you to go. How do you discern all of that?
I don't think God could tell my 16-year-old self the number one song in my catalog is going to be a song called Hosanna Rock I wrote for preschoolers. You know, like at that point, I wasn't ready for that part of the calling. You know, what my response to it would have probably been very different than my response was once I got into my late 20s, you know? And so the thing that I've noticed too, because as I came to Nashville and met with different people and, you know, like almost had so many different record deals and like, you know, major things like happen that then didn't. And I remember one day I was meeting with an A&R guy and he was like, you can, you know, kind of knowing some of this history and doors closed that had happened. And he was just like, okay, what's the skeletons in your closet? You know, like, why does this keep not working out? And I was like, oh, I don't look at it that way at all. Like I look at it as truly God guiding my steps and closing the doors that I'm not supposed to walk through. And, you know, it's just kind of one of those conversations that forever kind of sticks with you to think about. But on this side of it, I can completely understand and see God needed to send me to Nashville so I could learn how to actually write a song and actually record great songs. Because those two things don't always go hand in hand with kids' music. And so, you know, I learned how to do it for real and I learned how to do it well, and even had a song that I wrote for a group called Avalon that went #1 on the radio and all that kind of stuff. I needed to learn things about the music business and about this town and about making music, but God had a different purpose for it. And so, it's easy to see on this side of it, you know, where it kind of makes sense. And like, yeah, I grew up around children's ministry and I learned to make music. And so why not mix those two things together? Like that's genius and everything. But, I also realized if some of those label deals that I was trying to happen back in the day, that would have been just CCM music. If they had happened, I realized as well, walking through those doors and paths would have probably not led me to a juncture in a place where I would have said yes to the kids' music thing either, you know? Right. So again, that's where it's like the closed doors, you know, and what sometimes all of a sudden feels like a dead end or, oh, we got to back up, just like when you're in a maze, and you get to certain points, you're like, okay, that's not it. Like, let's find another path. I think sometimes that is part of the journey of just getting you to be on that path that he truly does have for you. And you do pick up different things and experiences and, learn different things along the way. And I'm able to reflect on that now and see none of it was in vain or without purpose. Like there was actually a point where I was working on staff at our church, and I realize now there can be peace in the midst of tension. Because on one hand, I knew I was supposed to be there and had peace. I was supposed to be there. On the other hand, there was a lot of tension where I was actually even asking questions like, where did I miss it before? Like if this is what I was going to do, then was Nashville a mistake? Was going and co-writing songs a mistake? Because these two things don't feel like they work together at the moment. But again, I was learning all about church culture and leading worship teams and developing musicians and worship leaders and like all these things that I now need on the church ministry side of what I do, of speaking to church leaders and teaching them about leading kids in worship and all of that. And so I needed that experience, even though it was a point in the journey where it was like, these things don't go together, and feeling like, did I mess up before? But I think it all comes down to so much in life, and I've got so much more I could share about this topic, but it just comes down to listening to God's voice and following peace and doing the thing that that he's asking you to do. Because I like to say it like this: the ripple effect of your obedience goes so much farther than you could ever imagine.
Oh, that is powerful. And Yancy, what wisdom, because I have to share. I mean, my career has taken all these weird left turns, right turns, things that I would have told you, finally breakthrough, green light, and then slam. and in our culture today, both in the secular culture and within the faith community, that's a lot of times where we tell somebody, oh no, you got to karate kick that door in. That's, that's some kind of barrier from the enemy or whatever. That beautiful way that you have had of looking at it and saying, I love that visual of being in the maze. And when you hit that dead end, go, okay, we got to find a different path. We've got to go a different direction, and allowing God to continue to hone that to really bring you home is so incredibly powerful. Talk to me about why we have a need to do music for children that, you and I both are probably familiar with like Kids Bop and stuff like that, where you take a standard and then you put some kids' voices on it, and you change it up a little bit, and then you kind of repackage it as this offering to kids. And what is different about what you do, and how do you approach it in a way that is so specific for children and for where their spiritual needs really are at that season of their life?
Yeah. So I'll say I believe fully 100% in the power of music. I know that it is an amazing way for us to learn and remember. And when I reflect on my own childhood, I can picture driving around in my mom's minivan that I think was like the first ever minivan that they made in the 80s, running errands. And I remember music that was playing in our car. And to this day, I can hear something said in a sermon. I can come across a certain scripture. I can be in a meeting where a certain biblical principle is talked about. And I have a song that I heard as a kid that honestly, I haven't pulled up the recording and listened to, in 30 years plus. And yet it's still, I can sing that song, as soon as my memory is triggered. And so that excites me because I realize that, hey, what we play for our kids really does matter. And music is sticky. It has amazing memory. And so just to help parents become more intentional about what they are playing as they run those errands, as they drive to school, as you're headed to soccer practice or hockey practice, as we do in our house, realizing that it's not just time filler and it's not just having the radio on, but you're planting seeds on the inside of them. So with what I do specifically, for kids. I think, the big difference of normal music for grown-ups and what I'm doing with kids is just being aware of things like attention spans, how long the song is, how much repetition is in it, the vocabulary that's in it. I make 2 different kinds of kids music. So I do a series for younger kids called Little Praise Party. I also make some music that sounds very, very normal, that's geared for preteen ages. And so, there's different things about those 2, but two things, but especially I would say on the Little Praise Party side of things, it's just like as a parent, how you might cook the same meal, you might put the same steaks on the grill or make the same, dish of spaghetti or whatever that looks like. But how you then put that on the plate and the bite-sized pieces that you cut up for your 2-year-old, versus your 6-year-old versus your 10-year-old, you're eating the exact same entree, but the bites that you take of it are very different. And so that's where as a songwriter, I'm trying to take a biblical truth from God's word and go, okay, how can I chop this up and make it palatable so that a 5-year-old can understand it? And so, that's finding the right vocabulary, to use to put it into words they can understand. But then it's also just putting the right mix of, fun or physical engagement or whatever that is to just kind of make it stick. And so that's what I get the job of doing, is just helping to impact kids and their families. Because honestly, I have plenty of parents that tell me they're able to actually enjoy my music, because I like to think it sounds pretty normal, we've all heard that kids music that just sounds like nails on a chalkboard, where you're just like, where's the ice pick? Let me go ahead and
Baby Shark comes to mind. Yeah.
There are those things. And someone one day on Instagram, they posted, they're like, I love you. I really do. But when it's like, 100 times back to back on repeat in a row, like I start losing my mind. I'm like, okay, that's fair. But as long as at the core, you love and appreciate it, we're good. I can't do anything about repeating it or whatever. But yeah, I think that's the biggest difference between, okay, you listening to the latest, Newsboys album or Carrie Job album or whatever. And what I'm doing is I'm just intentionally going, I want to make sure the 5-year-old gets it. I want to make sure the 8-year-old will not roll their eyes. I want to make sure that I'm showing the 10, 11, 12-year-old that Jesus is relevant to their life based on what they're hearing, based on what it sounds like, that it's not lame and clueless, as to what culture might be like in their eyes. And so it's fun. I love it.
Yeah. What a beautiful challenge to think through what is going to really intersect the lives of our younger people. Music is so incredibly sticky. You may have seen the documentary, and wow, Yancy, I wish I could remember the title of it. My mother went through the Alzheimer's journey, and watching her go through that and watching how music was what was retained, even when she wasn't completely clear who I was or other events. You could start a hymn or a John Denver song, and she was right there with you. She knew it. And to your point, I am floored by songs that will come up that I know, like you said, I haven't heard in I don't know how long. Some of that has to do with Flock of Seagulls, but that's another story. But there will be music that comes up that I know I probably haven't heard since I was a young child. And the way that God designed our brains, when we put music and words to something, our ability to remember that, even in a season in the ravages of Alzheimer's, it still retains. And there's something so powerful to me about watching a young child know words to songs of faith, and something so powerful about seeing someone at the end of their life remember the words that they were taught as a child through music about faith. It's absolutely incredible. Yancy, how do you discern what kids are ready for when it comes to topics surrounding our faith. Because obviously we love to talk about God's love and God's compassion and being part of the family of God. And our faith also has some really challenging themes when it comes to sin, when it comes to the violent death of Jesus, when it comes to some of the things that happen in the lives of those that we often look to as the saints, some of the sacrifices that they made, some of God's anger toward his children when they went away from his wisdom and righteousness. How do you distill all that down? Like, what ages and stages do you think kids are ready for some of those topics? And what are the things that we want to make sure are foundational first, maybe before we get into some of that?
Man, I don't know. I think some of it depends on the child as far as that goes. I mean, and if I'm honest, many of the subjects that you just referenced, I mean, it's not like I have a song about about most of those things. You know, I haven't done a song about the sacrifices.
You don't have some rousing tune about adultery or something?
No,
No,
no, I know. So I've personally been able to, curveball a lot of that stuff. But if I think about it just in my own mom hat, and my sons, I think some of it just depends on the kid. Like my oldest, he's just, I don't know if he's the old soul or whatever. I feel like he's been able to handle things, even like shows that he watches. He knows what we believe as a family or,
right.
certain things where it's like, okay, we very much disagree with that. But I feel like he's been able to handle things that were not kid, like just more. And that being said, one of his biggest obsessions in the Bible is Revelation.
Right.
Right. All the stuff that's there, that's intriguing to him and that's interesting. And so, where he's super duper drawn to that on the flip side, like my younger child, we haven't arrived at a stage where he's just like, tell me all about the dragon and the
yeah. He's not
the
there
snake
yet.
or whatever. He's like, I'm so obsessed with Jonah and the story of Jonah and like wants to read it every single time that we're reading his Jesus Storybook Bible. And, it's one of those things as a parent that I'm like, oh God, like what do you have in store for him that he needs this story just completely branded on his little spirit,
Right.
Because it's just like, what is it that you have for him to do? Because he is so drawn to just that story of Jonah and, his disobedience and his willingness to do what God was telling him to do. And so it's one of those things that's like exciting and frightening.
Yeah.
As a parent.
That's a big story.
Like, wow, he's really drawn to this. But I think some of it's just a different child. And, it's just like everything. It's different phases of growth and development. It's the same thing with our bodies. It's the same thing with our ability to read and write and do math and all the things. And, I think the gospel is hinged on love and with the youngest ages, it's like, even when I think about worship, it's like, I can equate to young kids that we sing to Jesus because we love him, because I know they understand and grasp the concept of love. They love their mama. They love grandma. They have their favorite, doll or stuffed animal. Like love exists in their life. And so I can talk to them about the things of God in relation to love. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think then just as the years go by, it grows and more details, get added to the picture.
Right.
To just give it the gravity and the weight of really what the gospel fully means and represents.
I love that, taking a good look at what our kids are drawn to in terms of the different Bible stories. And you're so right. I mean, with mine, it was all over the place. I had ones who were really fascinated in in angels and what that meant. And I had ones that really wanted to drill down into some of the numbers of the thing, why 4,000 at this miracle, why 5,000 at that. And I had others who, were just really happy to review again, Noah and the ark. and that was mainly about the animals. It wasn't really about the sin of the world and a redemption story. It was just kind of like, oh. So you're right. I think there is a lot of pliability in taking a look at what our kids are drawn to and making sure that we're doing what we can, because that can be a God nudge. You're so right. That can be something that they're going to need in their life. How do we as parents, and you got to experience this as a young person, and I know that you're now paying it forward in all of the teaching and leading that you're doing for those who are in leadership over kids. How do we make sure that we are allowing our child to go in the direction that God is drawing them, rather than getting a lot of our own ideas and concepts around the way that we know God's interacted with us or led us? And I'm not talking about somehow watering down truth, or I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about the path that God has for each of his kids and the directions that he wants each of them to head. How do you discern that as you're thinking about the music that you're presenting and the experience that you had? Because as you said at the top of our conversation, you had people speaking into you from a young age, and you look back and go, wow. And I love that you see that as confirmation. I know other people who've had an experience who felt like they were pushed into going into certain directions in ministry or leadership. And they felt really a burden, and not a godly burden, to go that direction. So how do we do that well?
Well, I feel like it's so many different layers of things. I think number one, most important, just comes down to teaching your kids to hear God's voice and to always be listening, for just that little tug in your heart, that little, all of a sudden idea or thought, or, smile at the person that's checking you out at the store. Like, it's not always something that's this grand act of faith, like we saw with Noah's Ark or, Abraham or whatever. Sometimes it's in the little bitty ordinary moments of our day. But I think it's in all those little bitty guesses that it's kind of a test from God of like, are you listening?
Right.
Are you hearing what I'm saying? And are you going to do the thing I tell you to do? When it's as simple as smile at the lady checking you out, ask how she's doing, compliment, like even recently I was sitting on an airplane and there was a family traveling across the aisle from me. There was a girl, she's probably like 12, 13 maybe. And I just had that like thought inside of like, I need to tell her that she's pretty.
Right.
And like, I even honestly sat there wrestling. So I was like, I don't want to be a creeper and like, I'm staring at her or, like whatever. And so I kind of sat there not doing it. But as I kept sitting there, I just knew, I'm like, you need to tell that girl that she's pretty. And so finally I like, grabbed her arm or whatever. And I just told that young girl, I was like, you're beautiful. And she like
lit up,
like she lit up. And I don't know what was going on in her life or what could be going on with her friends or whatever. But I know that young girl needed to hear me say those words that day as she went to, I think, have a family vacation with her family. And so, but I look at those little bitty moments as tests for the big serious things that God would ask me to do with my ministry and my music and all of that. And so, I think when stuff comes up with my boys, it's just teaching them to pray. And it's not always telling them point blank, well, this is what you need to go do, but like inviting them to invite God into that situation and give them room and space and opportunity to ask God for wisdom about it and to let them listen for his voice to give them direction.
Right.
I think what he wants them to do.
Absolutely. I recently saw a cartoon I thought was cute. It was two moms and two kids, and one of the moms and one of the children had a book they were reading, and the mom sitting next to the mom with the book said, how do you get your kids to love to read? And, the visual is, well, because mom's reading, right? And this opportunity we have every day, as you said, that it doesn't have to be this super targeted, outlined curriculum, if you will, just that willingness to play things in the car that are becoming seeds in our kids' hearts, allowing them to see us living out the commandment of being kind, of loving our neighbors well, of smiling at the person at the checkout counter and holding a door or grabbing a bag for somebody, whatever that is. So those are the moments, I think, that really create the fertile ground for spiritual growth when our kids see us do it. Well, Yancy, I know you've got 2 great projects that have come out. You've got a music project and a book. Where can listeners find out about those?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, you can go to yancyministries.com is my website, but specifically music wise for your kids, you can listen to that on any streaming platform. So Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, Amazon, YouTube, all the things. Just type in Yancy and you will find it on YouTube. My channel is Yancy, not Nancy. And that's kind of the same thing on my social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. My username is Yancy, not Nancy. So definitely check that out. Little Praise Party Out of This World is the newest one for young kids. And let me just say something kind of to the last thing that you were saying. I just want to challenge parents again about the being intentional to what you listen to in the car, because I can tell you both in the testimonies that I've had from other parents that have messaged me and told me about it, but I can also tell you within my own family that those songs lead to conversations where kids hear something in the song and they ask a question about a lyric that they heard, or, and all of a sudden you're running your errands or you're doing your thing, but it becomes a discipleship moment for you where you get to actually unpack that spiritual concept a little bit more to help your child understand that thing that they were questioning. I've heard parents tell me about all of a sudden at bedtime, it came up where the child was asking a question about something that was in the songs, the music that they had been listening. And it's just those moments where it's like that conversation would not have happened without the child being exposed to that thing that they're hearing. And so I just challenge and I empower you, moms, grandmas, aunts, all the things that are listening, like play for your kids the things that you want to plant down deep on the inside of them, because it does take root and it does grow and it sticks with them for years to come. About my book, I wrote a book all about kids worship. And so especially if you are a church leader or worship leader of any kind, if you work with kids or student ministry, I would challenge you to read it. I have had moms read the book. There's a very practical section at the end that if you're not working in a church probably doesn't make as much sense for you, but probably the first half, 2/3 of the book is really all about worship. It's all about the power of kids worshiping. And it's about things we can learn from David's life, as to why I believe he was given that title, Man After God's Own Heart. And that's his muscle, his reflex that he had in his life to worship. And so the book is called Sweet Sound, The Power of Discipling Kids in Worship. Carrie Job wrote the foreword for me, and you can learn more about it at yancyministries.com/sweet sound. Awesome. I would love for you to read it. Audiobook, ebook, print, all the options are there. So yeah.
Awesome. And we'll have Rebecca get that into the show notes so that listeners can go and find all of that. Yancy, can't thank you enough for being on. What a powerful factor that we often don't think about. We think about it for ourselves a lot of times, but we don't think about all the time for our kids. Just this beautiful and very, in many ways, simple way to continue to get God's word into our kids when we're running around doing all the things. Yancy, thanks so much. So appreciate you.
Thank you.